This attack is eerily realistic.
Everything is sexist. Everything is racist. And you have to point it all out.
Back on August 31st, the developer of Saints Row, Volition, was shut down by their parent company, Embracer Group. Here's their official statement. 30 years of making games. There are only a handful of studios in the industry that have been around for 30 years, and we took a lot of pride over at Volition being, okay, nobody really cares, we all know what happened. Volition made some okay games, but didn't really hit the center stage until they put out Saints Row. By Saints Row 3, the series had been cemented in the minds of gamers as the zanier, funnier Grand Theft Auto. But by Saints Row 4, everyone's patience was starting to stretch just a bit too thin. By the time 2022's Saints Row reboot finally dropped, it had been many, many years since people even cared about the franchise. And all of our worst fears were confirmed. They had wokeified it. Yep, Anita Sarkeesian was involved at one point and all the rest of it. Watch my previous video about the game for the rundown. The TLDR is that it was a 1-2 punch of terrible millennial writing full of current year nonsense and censorship of anything people liked about the old Saints Row, as well as being a bug-filled mess. Broken animations, broken missions, broken graphics, broken world geometry. The whole thing just seemed entirely unfinished. Here's the trajectory the company took after the game's release. In September of 2022, the CEO of Embracer was disappointed by Saints Row's polarizing response, saying that personally, I had hoped for a greater reception to the game, and that there are a lot of things that could be said in detail around it, but I am on one hand happy to see lots of gamers and fans happy, and at the same time I'm a bit sad to also see fans not happy, so it's difficult. However, he stressed the need to wait for the quarterly report in November before release setting anything in stone. Well, November 2022 came, and Volition was reassigned to Gearbox. Now, Gearbox ain't great either. I did a whole video how much they suck too, but they're definitely better than Volition. Embracer finally admitted that the reboot did not meet the full expectations and left the fan base partially polarized, which is a nice way of putting it. Because Embracer owns both Volition and Gearbox, they merged Volition into Gearbox because they have all the tools, including an experienced management team in the US, to create future success for the company. The reason behind this was that quarterly report, where it was revealed that the Saints Row reboot cost over $100 million to develop and represented a huge loss for the company. Under Gearbox's watchful eye, Volition promised a whole host of Saints Row updates. Look at all this stuff. They had big plans to really try to make this game work, but it just wasn't meant to be. I hope no one bought the season pass. None of this shit ever saw the light of day because a major investor into Embracer Group, the Saudi-owned Savvy Games, pulled out of the company, leading to over 900 layoffs, including the entirety of Volition. This announcement was quietly dropped on the company's LinkedIn page at 12:30 p.m. EST, the exact same day and time that the NDA for Starfield ended, and games journalists were allowed to publish their reviews, which makes me personally think that Embracer was trying to slip this news story by undetected. Now, there's a lot to say about Volition going under. Tons of people are blaming it on woke subversion or SJW infestation or however you want to word it, and for sure that's absolutely a factor. Watching people try to deny it online has been pretty hilarious. This guy back in 2022 said, "Fake Saints Row fans when the woke reboot is a financial success and Volition doesn't go out of business." He got community noted 1 year later with the announcement that Volition was closing its doors. Twitter's fucking amazing, dude. From the outside looking in, it really seems like Volition did everything wrong here. In response to them censoring everything iconic about the old Saints Row, they were lashing out at their fans on the official Twitter account. One of the people who worked on the game, it seemed like he was trying to astroturf a response, or he was in a bubble, or he was coping or something, when he tried to put the idea out there of true Saints Row fans enjoying the game on launch, while internet neckbeard nobodies were telling them to stop having fun. When let's be real, nobody was having fun with this game beyond mocking it. I'm not surprised he deleted the tweet. And then there's the fact that they thanked their Discord and Reddit moderators in the game's credits for their work. A nice gesture, but people began to notice that one of the Discord mods, Mega Freeman, had nothing but contempt for people who liked the old Saints Row games, while a couple of their moderators were active on r/teenagers making edgy rape jokes, and r/rape kink actively enjoying their rape fetish. Now, I personally don't care. You want to make edgy jokes? Go ahead. You want to fap to rape stories? Go ahead. That's your business. The issue is that you are indulging in this shit while telling everyone else that they're problematic, bigoted, gamer chud man babies for wanting to see boobs in a video game. It's safe horny all over again. Well, it turns out that a viewer of mine actually worked on the Saints Row reboot. He showed up in my chat while I was playing the game on my gaming channel with my editor, Dave. After the news dropped that Volition was going under, he agreed to answer any questions I had about the development process. We spoke around 6 months ago, and he asked that I not publish this video right away, as a lot of his colleagues were still looking for work, and he didn't want to somehow threaten any of their careers. Of course, I'll be keeping everyone anonymous anyway. Now, it's possible that this guy could just be a troll, and I had the wool pulled over my eyes, but everything he said sounded like the real deal, and to prove it, he showed me his copy of the Saints Row staff poster. Everyone who worked on Saints Row got a poster with the entire team's signature on it. The metadata on the image he sent me checks out, and running it through Google image search reveals no matches, so I'm inclined to believe that this guy's the real deal. Also, since it was a text interview, Editor Dave will fill in for his voice. He started off by giving me a screenshot from a former coworker from Facebook. The former coworker was one of those more woke employees and said, "I really thought we were going to do great things again, despite the vocal minority of toxic fans demanding we all unalive ourselves because we refuse to continue to put inappropriate, racist, sexist, hateful content in our current games. If the games I work on fail financially because we refuse to cow to bigotries of the past and placate the hateful fans, I'm okay with failure." Well, there you have it. They don't want to produce what you want them to produce, and they're willing to go broke denying what you want. So feel free to help them in that endeavor. Doesn't matter what names they call you, you're the one holding the money. Then, our base developer friend outlined the internal reaction to the initial success of Saints Row.
I worked at Volition throughout Agents of Mayhem and Saints Row 5. I was originally excited to work there because around 2015, so many video games were taking themselves too seriously, in my opinion. When I got in, I was kind of surprised about everyone's attitude about their own IPs. There were a couple of mindsets of Volition. There was one group who didn't want to make Saints Row 1 because what do a bunch of white guys in the middle of a cornfield, central Illinois, know about this? Funny enough, they did do their due diligence, watching relevant movies and going to rap concerts to immerse themselves in the culture. Even so, there was also hesitation to make a game about gang warfare. My comment about this was always, are you saying only black people engage in gang culture? That question usually stopped any discussion on the topic. The other group at Volition did not like Saints Row 3, specifically all the sexually free and explicit things. Saints Row 3 came into being because of a rejection of the gang culture. They did a pivot because of the internal backlash against Saints Row 1 and 2. There weren't a lot of these people, but they were loud and at the top. A lot of the guys that had been at Volition for a while at that point were now middle-aged and had families. They didn't want to be making games with dildos and porn stars. Saints Row 4 was a pivot away from that. These people wanted to make space sims or RPGs like Summoner or Descent/Free Space.
This actually makes a lot of sense to me, as Saints Row 4 was, until the reboot, considered the weakest game in the franchise. It's a parody of The Matrix and Mass Effect, where everyone's on a spaceship and they jack into a simulation of the Saints Row franchise. In retrospect, the idea that the original team was aging out of their old style of humor and wanted to do something more serious actually seems pretty plausible to me, considering how Saints Row 4 ended up. Then, our guy talks about Agents of Mayhem, a failed heist-type game in the Saints Row universe that came out in like 2018 and wasn't really all that well received.
Agents of Mayhem started out kinda as a Saints Row sequel. There's still evidence of that in the game, use of the logo, and the story element / connection between Gat Out of Hell and Agents of Mayhem. But internally, we were making a standalone game in the Saints Row universe. Agents of Mayhem had a lot of problems. Our GM was lying to Deep Silver and saying we were making a Saints Row sequel, and telling us that we were making our own magnum opus. People from Deep Silver would come to us and say, "This isn't Saints Row," and people internally would say, "Yeah, no shit," and all the feedback was, "Make it more like Saints Row." We didn't really understand until Deep Silver axed him at the Agents of Mayhem layoffs, then told us in the aftermath of the layoff meetings that they thought we were making Saints Row. We ended up pivoting so many times on Agents of Mayhem that we essentially made the content of the game in a year, despite being in the works for 4 to 5 years.
I gotta be honest, I don't know much about Agents of Mayhem, but I do know that another YouTuber by the name of Flippy somehow got access to the pre-release developer kit of the game before it even launched, and made a video about it back in 2018. He also made a second video in 2022 when his NDA expired, and he could reveal more stuff. So if you want that Agents of Mayhem lore, go check those out. Our friend then began talking about his time working on the Saints Row remake.
Deep Silver axed all management and replaced it with management that wasn't much better. We started Saints Row 5. The story was a big pain point. We had a cringe story about being able to pick your mom, MILF or grandma, and your dad was Bob Saget. Our writer with those ideas left halfway through. We ended up hiring back on contract the guy who wrote Saints Row 2 and 3 to fix the story, and he came up with what is in the story now. Friends, sitcom vibes, student loans, etc. Any criticism our writers had of his stuff was not allowed. According to Embracer, they focus tested the story and tone somewhere, and people were positive to it. I wonder if they even mentioned what the game was. I'd love to see the methodology on that. I did a search. No one else knows did the story for this game. Funny enough, he didn't want credit for it either. The story was a mess. The gameplay / missions had to keep pivoting to keep up with the story, and things were getting more and more woke. We had an internal diversity, inclusivity, equity group that was filled with white people. The one minority that was at the company was invited to it, LOL, and they ended up quitting because it was stupid. We had robbing in the game early on, but since the 2020 riots, they didn't want to upset BLM, nor allow any incentive for killing cops or innocent people. So we took out any cash or XP gain from killing police or pedestrians, and robbing was completely removed.
This all checks out. The game, to me, seemed like it suffered from all the worst problems of modern game design. Tons of icons and a bland open world map, simply following a quest log and an on-screen compass and arrows in the ground telling you where to go, that sort of thing.
Pay was also extremely low. Senior talent promoted internally were not making six figures. We are talking seasoned programmers and designers, and there was always an incentive to leave and come back because it was a better way to get promoted and get a raise. Many people went 3 to 5 years without any raise or promotion. Volition always preferred paying a lot of money for talent from the West Coast, but not focusing on the loyal employees that have been there for a while. Volition does have a lot of talented people, but they were never put in any positions that would make the game any better. The directors of Saints Row were really into micromanaging everyone. There was no vision. The vision was whatever the director wanted at the time. We need more serious.
We need more silly.
Where's the serious?
Why is this silly?
The lack of consistent directional tone ended up being used as a tool to just inject whatever specific thing the guys at the top wanted. It was pretty soul-crushing. The direction from the top that our open world got was, players like seeing icons on the map and want to go and do specific gameplay of those icons, completely ignoring other games in the genre. Saints Row 5 actually sold well in the first week. It was around 1 million sales the first week, and I was shocked. The sales fell off sharp and went to almost nothing after the first week, and that's when people started panicking. They told us we need to drop our engine and use Unreal. We got put under Gearbox thinking we might co-dev with them or something. There was a ton of changes going down in the past year or so. But what ultimately killed them is some Embracer investor pulled out a few billion and Embracer went around trying to cut costs. Volition was an easy place to cut. There's a lot more, like some people wanted to have a feature where you can take someone's clothes, leveraging our clothing / customization features, but the diversity group vetoed it, saying taking someone's clothes is like rape. I do really love a lot of people I met there, but Saints Row 5 was the result of the people on top needing to make a Saints Row game because Deep Silver wanted it. They wanted a return on their investment when they bought Volition. But the people up top didn't want to make a Saints Row type game, so they just used the brand as a vehicle to make something they'd rather make. Very similar to the Star Wars video you made a while back. I actually sent a few coworkers that Star Wars video saying it was relevant to Saints Row.
Oh boy, I don't even need to advertise my own videos anymore. Someone else can do it for me. But seriously, that was a pretty wild ride of a story. At least I think so. A lot of what I wanted to know, he pretty much already answered on his own. I asked him one question. The more woke members of the team, like the person who posted that Facebook comment, what was their reaction to the game's development process? How did they react to development problems, or the constant shift in leadership or demands for the game? How did they react to people who objected to their vision of the game? How did they react when the game was panned and Volition was shuttered? The reason I asked this was because I wanted to know what people like the intern who used the Saints Row Twitter account to shit on their fans was thinking.
A lot of people had issues with the tone in the story. A lot of people had issues with the shifting tone. The woke people had an issue when we got darker / grittier / more mature. The rest of us in the other direction. I think there was consensus at least on the leadership. Personally, I think if we just went full on woke but still had a fun game, it would have gone better than trying to half-ass everything. Volition's hierarchy the past decade has been really corrupt. Only people who were yes men got to the top. If you made issues or voiced complaints, they would put you in a corner that they didn't care about, wouldn't promote you, or fire you. Dan Cermak, the GM after Mike Koulis left, was the guy that did that. He was the start of the downfall of Volition. There was a lot of cope internally. People were in denial about the tone / story. The people who were quiet anytime anyone spoke out, like,
our old games were sexist. We can't do that anymore. No one likes that.
This is actually quite interesting to me. The idea that the team was internally struggling between several different visions, tried to half-ass them all, and the Saints Row reboot is what we got. I wonder, would it have actually been better had they all been unified in one direction, even if that direction was woke? It's possible. Saints Row was a trash fire, but clearly some people tried to do something with it. It's clear to me that our friend puts the primary blame not on the developers, the programmers, or even the woke influence, but on poor management, which he next goes into.
Generally, the flow is producers set a quality bar, designers and programmers work together to implement. If there is an issue with quality, target, tone, etc., they tell the problem to the designer, and the designer and programmer work together to implement and come up with a solution. What happened at Volition is producers just demanded a particular solution, so designers had no creative input. Some designers and leadership looked down our player base to the point that I was just disgusted. Players don't know where to go, we need icons on the map. Players aren't gonna understand talent points.
Players don't want to unlock abilities and skills.
Players can't control the camera and drive at the same time, so we'll not allow them to.
All our diehard fans want Saints Row 2, but Saints Row 3 sold better. We don't need to listen to them.
At this point, I decided to ask one more clarifying question. You've been saying that, in your opinion, it was management who micromanaged and interfered with the process that ultimately ruined the Saints Row reboot, not the woke stuff that one side of the dev team wanted to shoehorn in? Without the micromanaging, how do you think it would have gone?
Yeah, so I think there are two parts of this. There's the woke stuff and the micromanaging stuff. There is definitely some overlap. If there was no micromanagement, I think we would have made a better game. I think there would have still been legit woke criticisms, but there would have been aspects of the game that would have been much better. It might have been a 7 out of 10 game instead of a 6 out of 10 game. I think some people could have ignored the woke stuff and just had some fun in the open world and playing co-op with your friend. I want to say it isn't even exactly because the people at the top were woke. This was a decentralized tyranny. Few members throughout the company were hyper woke, a loud minority, and leadership couldn't stick to a specific vision. As we started running out of time and things were not coming together, leadership panicked and overcorrected/started micromanaging. They didn't want to stir the pot, but we also needed to get the game done, so every decision ended up going, aka let's do the most expedient and safe thing now. Lots of game developers end up making games for other game developers, not gamers. There was a big exodus after Agents of Mayhem, and in the last year or so since Saints Row 5, we had people leaving, ready to leave every month. Most people I knew were looking, or just going through the motions. It wasn't exactly because of fear of the studio closing, it was more about pay. Volition pay was lagging behind. The past 3 years they were talking about salary adjustments that never ended up happening. Volition historically used central Illinois and cheaper cost of living to justify paying talent way less salary. When remote work happened, they had a serious problem getting people over because now people could have their low cost of living while working for a West Coast studio. I made, and I know a lot of people made, 50% more salary just by changing jobs. That was a bigger motivation for people leaving. I thought Volition was safe because of the restructure to being under Gearbox. I thought they would just make Volition a codev studio to help Gearbox with their projects. Everyone knew Saints Row bombed, but as long as Gearbox had work to do, the whole restructure didn't make sense if they were just going to shut down Volition a year later. Randy Pitchford even came to Central Illinois to talk to us. Despite the controversy, he was very personable and had a consistent vision for the company. The one talk he gave was more leadership than I've ever seen from Volition leaders. Volition/Gearbox was planning on sharing tech. There were meetings underway for knowledge sharing, etc. That's why I said I think it was the Embracer deal/investment falling through. If Volition was paying me the same amount as my new job, I probably would have stayed. I liked the people I worked with, and I liked my day-to-day work despite all my criticisms of management/leadership/projects.
I know. I keep saying one more question, but after hearing this, I had to ask. Did you all see the writing on the wall after the game bombed? Was everyone scrambling towards their exit strategy like you did?
Agents of Mayhem plus Saints Row 5 plus Embracer losing a deal killed Volition. I think if you remove one of those, Volition would have been safe for at least one more project, or would have been restructured to just do Gearbox's bidding. I do know Gearbox was excited that they had Volition now, and access to the Red Faction IP through Embracer. Randy Pitchford made that very clear. My prediction, they will give Saints Row to some random Eastern European developer who doesn't give a fuck and is about that Adidas life. And they will go balls to the wall gangsta and just not care about controversy, and it will end up being extremely successful.
And there you have it. Thanks very much to our anonymous developer friend, who gave me all of these cool stories to share. Volition is dead and buried until somebody comes along another decade or so and tries to loot the corpse. And you know what? Part of me wants that to happen. Maybe the way forward is that Volition, or the Saints Row IP, is put on sale for chump change, so that people who actually do love the franchise can create the most offensive, degenerate, violent, hypersexual Saints Row game ever made. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be in the cards, at least right now. Embracer Group recently came back into the spotlight, this time for canceling an upcoming Deus Ex game, laying off another 97 people in the process, this time at Eidos Montreal. If what our anonymous developer friend described as happening at Volition is actually happening all across Embracer Group's various studios and companies, let alone the entire gaming industry, it would actually explain a lot of what we're all seeing right now. A lot of gamers and fans, people on the outside, have been remarking that game development appears to be going through some kind of collapse, a la Atari and E.T. from back in the 80s. Considering the working conditions that were described at Volition, I wouldn't be surprised if similar events are currently playing out in other studios. A lack of vision and quality leadership at the top can create space for ideologues to move in, begin capturing the institution, and turn it towards the promotion of their political message. However, clumsily they might actually do that in practice. This type of identitarian progressivism functions like an infection in these institutions, taking advantage of gaps in the defenses in order to slip in and begin reproducing. But like all infections that are left to run amok, they eventually kill their hosts. I think this is why so many studios that are pumping out garbage games right now, and hiding behind politics as an excuse for them, appear to be going through a slow motion collapse. It might take 5, 10, even 15 years, but I think we'll be seeing a lot of these companies go the way of Volition.